my kind of people. I wouldn't want to live there. But it was a rare period of peace. It was disrupted in a number of ways. Partly it was disrupted by George Bush's war on terror. One of the great achievements of the war on terror, nobody wants to talk about it anymore, but it was greatly heralded at the time, was that they succeeded in closing a charity, Al-Barakat, which was declared to be a major funder, Islamic charity, major funder of terror, great victory, headlines were really progressing. It was later discovered and conceded quietly in the small print that this charity had nothing to do with Islamic terror, but it had a lot to do with Somalia. It was one of the main sources of income for Somalia. It's a very poor country. But the charity had set up banks, businesses. It was providing, by Somali standards, substantial sums. And when the charity was closed down, it pulled the rug out of a substantial part of the Somali economy. Well, that made a bad situation, a disastrous situation. There was never any compensation for that. When we do things, if other people suffer, it's their problem. And it wasn't even discussed. You can find the data if you like. Well, the next thing that happened is that the U.S. Pushed through the Security Council a resolution calling on all states not to interfere in the internal affairs of Somalia. Right after that, the United States backed an Ethiopian invasion of Somalia to throw out the Islamic courts, which is what they were called. So, Ethiopia's, it's not an emperor, but it's a nobleman. It's got a big army. So yes, they were able to push the Islamic court. There was a government that was internationally recognized, had held a tiny little corner of Somalia right near the Ethiopian border. And they tried to put them back in office. They went into Mogadishu, they killed a lot of people, stirred up a lot of conflict. Militias started developing. The country went into chaos again. That was the U.S.-backed Ethiopian invasion. One of these are some of the things that were going on. Meanwhile, other things were going on. Somalia didn't have a functioning government. So therefore, the European Union and Saudi Arabia, and Japan, and others were able to exploit the situation by destroying Somalian waters. Somalia is a big coastline, and this happened to be a very rich fishing area. So they sent in factory ships and fished out the area, and the Somali fishermen are not going to be able to compete with. It's a pirates and emperors story again. They can't compete with
these big
huge
ships.
factory. In fact, this happened off the coast of the United States in Georgia's Bank, but the U.S. is a functioning country, so it set a 200-mile limit and kicked them out. Well, Somalia couldn't do that. Also, Europe particularly started using these Somali waters as a dump, including toxic wastes. You got to get rid of all this junk somewhere. Here we send the sewage to Haiti and places like that, but the European Union started dumping them in Somali waters, which again undermined the possibilities for one of the small industries that functioned, namely the fishing industry. Okay, put all these things together and draw a conclusion. Here's Somali fishermen. Conclusion is piracy. So yes, piracy is a form of terror, but it didn't come out of nowhere.
All right. So just looking into that scenario, why is that? Like, if anything happens through whatever kind of Muslims, extremists or whatever they are, that is called an Islamic terrorism or Islamic extremism. But however, whatever happens in Israel or happens in the U.S. or anywhere in the world, and whoever does this, it's never called a Christian extremism or Jewish extremism or whatever.
No. In fact, let's be concrete. Somali piracy is a form of terror, and it has a background. But there's much worse piracy that goes on, direct, real piracy, like hijacking ships. For 30 years, Israel has been hijacking ships in international waters between Cyprus and Lebanon, capturing them, killing people, kidnapping them. Take Lebanese or Palestinians going up and back between Lebanon and Cyprus, bringing many of them to Israel. Many are held as hostages, sometimes for decades. Others go into prison without charge. Some go into secret prisons, which are reported in Israel and Europe, but not here, which are probably torture chambers. Well, that's pretty serious piracy, and it continues. There have been attempts by international activists to try to break the Israeli siege of Gaza, which has no legitimacy other than Israel happens to be a client state of the biggest emperor of all, so it can do what it likes. But they're trying to strangle Gaza. They're incidentally trying to destroy the Gazan fishing industry. Israeli gunboats keep driving fishermen closer and closer to the coastline, out of Gazan territorial waters. That also kills people, sinks boats, and so on. Mm-hmm. And you can't fish near the coastline because Israel's destroyed the sewage and power plants, so it's all polluted. And there have been attempts to break the siege by just sending peaceful ships through, and Israel hijacks them on the high seas, drives them off, either to Israeli ports or to somewhere in Lebanon or something like that. Well, all of this is pretty serious piracy. Nobody calls it Jewish piracy. In fact, nobody calls it piracy at all. Mm-hmm. In fact, nobody even barely report it.
In media.
I mean, you really have to look to find a report of it. It's pirates and emperors.
Didn't Israel hijack the ship back in 2009 that was going to Palestine? I remember you were telling me about it, and like how we did not hear it in media, but when in Somalia, when they hijack ships, American ships, it's all over the news. Like that just happened in 2009.
As I say, this has been going on for 30 years.
Wow.
And it's not secret. I mean, occasionally you'll find in the 18th paragraph of a story in the New York Times about Palestinian terrorism, you'll find a couple of lines saying that Israel has a couple hundred people in some prison somewhere that they picked up in the high seas. They do the same bombing in Lebanon.
Yeah.
But if you're an agent of the emperor, all of this passes.
So I guess I want to go back to that interview that you gave to Tony Jones I was reading about. And this thing, like, I don't know if you heard about it, but this thing really shocked me that, Tony Jones